So, basically right now, my company name is RC Bowman Architecture, and that's just basically a sole proprietor that I set up in order to operate on my own. The 2008 collapse kind of left me without a job, so I decided to, instead of looking around and there was no jobs available, I started my own thing. So that kind of was the inception of RC Bowman Architecture. It was just survival at that point, and just to be able to operate and start my own thing while there was no work out there.
Did,
So,
did you get your license at the 08, 09, or did you already have
oh
your,
no, no, I
you
mean,
started the Bowman, RC Bowman?
yes, yeah, I just started RC Bowman Architecture. Going back, I went to the UIC, University of Illinois in Chicago. I was started in 1980. Graduated. It's a 5-year program at UIC, but I was on the 7-year program. And predominantly that was because I extended it in order to go to Europe. UIC had a European summer program. And I couldn't afford it to go. I couldn't afford to go when all my friends, all my my compatriots were at school were going. So I extended it I just kind of spread it out and extended it so that I could go. And that kind of extended my, my curriculum a little bit. But so I graduated officially. I should have graduated in 85, and I graduated in 87. And then the summer of 86, I went to Europe and spent 3 months traveling through Europe on the UIC summer program, and studied architecture through Europe, which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah. And
But
looking at the architecture, right?
yes, looking at the ancient, all the classic architecture, contemporary as well as ancient. It was probably one of the best things as an architect I've ever done as far as knowledge base. I mean, the architecture program generally doesn't teach you how to be an architect. It teaches you the foundations of what an architect needs to know: drafting, basic ideas, basic design concepts, kind of all that stuff. You don't really become to know what an architect does until you're out into the field and you're actually employed. That's when you know the practical side. So, from my experience in school, they taught you to do all the things, to spread your wings and do all the things that you're never really going to be doing once you actually get out. So you're doing all this design stuff, and they tell you kind of don't be practical, be conceptual, do all this stuff, because when you get out, you're going to be doing stair details for 10 years. So, that type of thing, right?
So like use your imagination, or
yeah,
get as
use your
wild as you
imagination
can.
early. Exactly. Use your imagination, spread your wings, learn all this design stuff, all the history and all that stuff, and then apply it once you get out of school, and then decide what you want to do, and then move on from there. So when I graduated, I just kind of went into a small office. While I was in school, I worked at a couple offices. I worked at a mechanical, electrical, and chemical engineering firm that taught me some of the technical skill, all these things that that an architect doesn't usually do. So I was doing piping diagrams for chemical plants. I was doing electrical engineering drawings, mechanical engineering drawings, and one of the more cooler things I did was went to Detroit and climbed around all the big cranes that did in the steel shops, the steel mills, because they were doing upgrading all the electrical systems in the big cranes that go back and forth with the ladles that pour the molten steel.
Yep.
Surveying the cabs and stuff like that, and then doing the drawings for that. So early on, I had a more technical, I'm more technical person, although I do have a design sense. I'm more technical. So that gave me the foundations of a lot of stuff, doing structural drawings, doing mechanical drawings, doing chemical piping drawings. From once I graduated, then I moved on and went with my first really professional architectural firm was with Tony Rossi, and he did a lot of stuff in Rosemont, Illinois, right?
Yeah.
A lot of small commercial. He did, interesting enough, did the Rosemont Horizon, which is now the I forgot what they call it now. It has one of those corporate names. But I worked on the Rosemont Convention Center.
Oh, cool.
I did a lot of residential stuff, doing houses and stuff for the mayor Donaldson at that time and his family. So it was fun because it did a lot of big projects, small projects. That's where I kind of cut my teeth. And then there, I had a friend who worked at Schaefer Associates, which was at that time the largest department store design firm in the country. At their biggest, they were about 100 people.
Oh, wow.
And so I was doing department store work, I was doing Marshall Fields and Carson Perry Scott and Dayton Hudson's and all that stuff. And that was my retail, my deep dive into retail.
Can I circle back real quick?
Sure.
The mechanical and the mechanical, electrical, and all that structural, that's just so people know, that's a whole nother animal compared to architecture, right?
Yes.
And those are separate things, separate what do you want to call it? Their own
disciplines.
Their own disciplines, correct.
Yeah.
And
to go back,
knowing those in the beginning probably shaped you to be even better architect. I mean, most architects don't know that stuff.
Right.
Right.
And to go back in school, so what happens in school is the first in a 5-year program, the first 4 years you're doing a lot of stuff, right? General architectural stuff. It's your last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get your foundations of structural, all this stuff. In your last year of school, when you declare your major,
mm-hmm.
and so you can go technology, design, or structure.
Oh, yeah.
So I went technology. Other people would stay design, and some people I knew went structural engineering, so they would do structure. So essentially, in the field, a structural engineer and an architect, and basically an architect, structural engineer would be a PE, a professional engineer. An architect is an architect, but by label, but they're pretty much the same thing.
And you go to the school for the same thing. It's the final year that separates.
An architect can do structural work, and a structural engineer, a PE, can do architectural work.
Oh, okay.
It's just basically your focus. An architect who does structural, you can do them both, but it's again an architect, unless you're really focused, is not going to be doing parking garages and high-rise structure. You might do residential and small stuff. You can size small steel and all that stuff. But when you get into the really difficult engineering stuff, you go with the structural engineer.
You want someone specialized.
Yeah, and the issue is, traditionally going back, there was a point at which liability was less of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Once liability became a bigger issue, architects started to not want to do structural work because there was too much liability involved, and they would defer to the structural engineer. Yep. So things kind of splintered in the industry because of liability and lawsuits. Crazy. And like that. So it kind of stratified the industry, where then everyone kind of separated into their own disciplines just from a liability standpoint.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. So the old, whatever you want to call it, old school architects, that was essentially someone that's a turnkey back in the day. The structural, the design. What about mechanical, electrical, plumbing?
Mechanical, electrical, the MEP stuff. That's a clear engineering discipline.
Always.
That's a totally separate thing. You would go to, that was a totally separate school. That was in the engineering school. So that was totally separate from architecture. That is a pure engineering program. So yeah. So plumbing, plumbing and mechanical and all that stuff. Yeah, that's and electrical. That's pure engineering.
Gotcha.
If you go back like to say the Frank Lloyd Wright period, Frank Lloyd Wright and all those architects, they would do structural conceptual stuff. People dump on Frank Lloyd Wright, because some of his stuff, like falling water, the concrete stuff, it was failing and it didn't last. But those architects were cutting edge. They were like pioneers in pushing the limits of that stuff. And that was the period where an architect was kind of like still considered the master builder.
Yeah.
And kind of knowledgeable in all the disciplines. Now they might work with structural engineers, but they came up with the basic, concepts of structure and started pushing the limits of it. And that, I mean, today, and back when I went to school, it was like, it was clearly defined, that structural engineers would do structure and like that. But typically, structures and structural engineers and architects are basically can do the same things.
Yeah, but because of lawsuits and liability, it kind of
yeah,
and
just you can't know everything, right?
Yeah.
You can't know everything, and you got to So designers, I mean, the thing is, once you get your degree and you get your license, this might be, some people might not like me saying this, but just because you get an architectural license doesn't mean you have the experience to practice and stamp drawings and practice architecture, because it's all experience based. So a designer, someone who's more of a designer, can get his license and he can stamp drawings just like anyone else. But it comes down to individual experience and knowledge and aptitude and all that stuff. So, I mean, there are architects who are good designers, but aren't the best technical architects. There are people who are technical architects that aren't the best designers.
Where do you fall?
I'm a technical architect, but I've been in the design industry side of it for so long, because my Schaefer Associates, the retail design firm I was at, was not an architectural firm. They were just the interior design firm, and they didn't stamp anything. So it was more design oriented. But so I worked with some of the best designers and started understanding and appreciating design work. And so, I basically then would be translating their designs. So I started into construction documents and technical side. So I started to understand kind of where they were coming from.
So you started in the design, kind of what you're saying,
yeah,
and then got to the technical.
Right. Yeah. It's the conceptual stuff that's, to do something, you have a client who says, I want to do this, and then take that grand idea and come up with a conceptual idea. That's not my forte. My forte generally is adapting, a designer's intent and make it reality. Gotcha. And that's kind of my forte ended up being understanding and working really closely with designers to try to make sure that what we build meets their design intent. And that's the skill sets that I kind of developed. And it wasn't until my current job and actually my previous job, where I was more involved in design, where I started being more comfortable with it. But yeah, so going back to my history, working at Schaefer Associates and becoming, starting there as a draftsman and then becoming a project manager, basically running teams of 5 to 10 people, doing two retail department stores up to 200,000 square feet, multiple levels. That's when you start understanding and start organizing teams and start running teams, and and making sure that make sure they know what they're doing, hitting schedules and detail, all that stuff. That's where I started honing my project management skills. I did stuff I did like water tower place. We did Carson Perry Scott's and what was it Carson Perry? No, I think it was Marshall Fields. We expanded Marshall Fields. So I was doing Marshall Fields work up there and going down working downtown. Didn't do some work down on State Street, but did do some other work. And I probably touched every single Carson Perry Scott in the Chicago area.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of what because we were doing all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Very
so
cool.
so that job kind of I honed my skills, and we were doing shop drawing level millwork drawings, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what we did back then. We were designing. Everything was custom designed. Every department was a different design. All the millwork was custom designed. So we would do these drawings, and then I learned how to do millwork. Draw millwork shop. Drawings and stuff like that. So. After that, I moved into restaurant work and started learning restaurants.
That's its whole. That's its own
Whole
animal.
other, yeah. And then moving up through the jobs, I landed at the De Palma Group, which was a commercial interiors. They had a commercial interiors side, and then they had a retail side. I was hired under the retail side and started running, and then eventually started running that and became their director of architecture. But then I started becoming the director of architecture. I started learning the commercial interior side. And so that kind of expanded my skill sets. And then kind of moved into from there. They also, De Palma Group also did auto dealerships, and that's where I was introduced to auto dealerships, and that's kind of I cut my teeth there.
Yeah.
From there, I went to another larger design firm, Chipman Adams, now called Chipman Design, I think. And I was doing retail work, and then their guy who did auto dealerships left the firm, and they had a big project. And they looked at me and says, "Don't you have auto dealership experience?" I go, "Yeah." So I took over their auto dealership stuff.
Oh, wow, very cool.
And that was kind of and then I worked with so that was kind of the thing that kind of gave me my automotive, cut my teeth doing a ground up with everything, right? So
was that a learning curve?
It was
automotive?
The learning curve. I mean, at De Palma we did it. Usually we did the design work. We didn't do the full service stuff. So that one, as a full service architect, and we were doing a ground up building. I was doing the service stuff, service and the front showroom stuff and all that in a ground up facility. And that gave me the foundations that when later on, it would move up to 2008 when I was out of a job. A designer that I knew called me up and said, "Hey, my mother-in-law works for the Napleton Group and they're looking for an architect. Would you want to give them a resume?" And I said, "Yeah." So I went in and interviewed with them, and it was as an independent outside architect. And they basically said, "Yeah, this looks good." I quoted them a job, right?
Yeah.
Full service, structural, architectural, started to kind of run the whole thing as I would as an architecture firm. And they accepted it. And they said that the thing is that Mr. Napleton would like you to work in the office because he likes hands-on. He likes to be hands-on with his architects. And so I said, "Sure, you set me up, get the computer, get the AutoCAD, do all that stuff, and I'll come in every day and I'll work as my own entity, but I'll work in your office." So my first day on the job, I walk in and they pulled me aside and says, "Well, we got to talk about something." I go, "Uh-oh, here we go." They go, "Mr. Napleton wants you to be a full-time employee." And I said, "Oh, let me think about that." Okay. It's like, I wasn't gonna, it's like,
Yeah.
benefits, I said, fine.
Especially with 08, right?
Oh yeah, this was 09. This is the end of 09. So I was laid off. 08 was in the crash. I was director of architecture at De Palma, and they were laying people off, and I knew at some point that was going to happen. I was one of the last ones because they already had an architect on staff, and I was director of architecture, and they didn't need to spend the money. So I was laid off in the spring of '09, and then I started my own thing and put out there on the internet that, hey, it's like, I was feeling lonely having a job, so I figured I would join the ranks of the unemployed, and I'm not going to look for a job. I'm going to start my own thing. So I had expediters and a bunch of people calling me up saying, "Hey, we need an architect. Would you work with us to do self-certification?" Because I'm self-certified in the city of Chicago, so I was doing that. So that was kind of kept me afloat until I got the Napleton thing, and then they told me that they would have they had 2 years worth of work. They can guarantee me 2 years worth of work. And I said, that's fine. As a new company, that would allow me to build a bunch of projects under my masthead that would then, when I go out and market, I can say, well, these were all done under me.
Yeah.
Well, it's been 15 years and I'm still there.
Yeah.
So so being the single person doing everything from blank page all the way through to construction manage, it actually turned out being a design build kind of thing where you start out, you get a project, you have a blank page, you get a property, and whether it's an existing facility or it's a blank property, you take it from empty page all the way through construction drawings, all the way through bidding, all the way through construction management to certificate of occupancy by yourself.
Yeah.
So it was probably the
That's
best experience. Yeah, it was the best experience an architect could have, because most architects always have a piece of the project and they're handling this portion of it, and someone else handles the other things. So they never really get to see the everything through and handle every part of it.
And that's what makes you so well-rounded, right? Is like
exactly that. It was what basically fleshed out. You see these things and may know how to do it, but you haven't quite done it. As director of architecture for 2 companies, I've been director of architecture. You supervise everyone. You know what everyone's doing. You kind of know everything, but you're not doing it. And there's little nuances to when you're fleshing out your construction documents from design that you don't know when you're just marking up someone else's drawings, right? You mark up someone's drawings, you don't want to tell them that they have to redo it because it sucks. You got to kind of take what and nudge it along to get things right. But when you're doing it yourself, all the decisions are yours. Everything you do, every line on the drawings are yours. And you take it from that concept to the drawings, and then you go into the field. Now you're going to build your own drawings. And that's when you start learning, God, I really should have drawn this a different way, or I didn't understand this. And working with contractors, and like that, you start understanding and getting to know what's wrong with your drawings, what you should put in, what you shouldn't put in. There's a reality to what an architect does in a firm, right? So you're doing a design, bid, build project. So you meet with the client. You're probably competing with other architects, so you got to come up with a fee, and you're competitive. So you don't, you probably think you need to keep it simple. You probably need 100 hours to do this job, but they're not going to like your price, so you cut it down to 80 hours, right? So I'll do this whole project for 80 hours, and they say, okay. Now, you've already compromised the time you need. So now as you move forward, you're doing your design, you're doing construction documents, and then you get to construction admin. You've probably burned all your fee up to that point. You probably even went over your fee on generating construction documents. So now you get out into the field, and there's a problem. Well, your boss is telling you, you can't spend any time in this. We don't have any fee, but you got a problem in the field. So now you have to basically try to get things done by not generating fee that you're not going to recoup for your company. So now you're looking at the business aspects of being an architect and fees and profits and all that stuff. Where it changes working for Napleton is the fact that I'm on salary, and it doesn't really matter how much time I spend. I have the time to get it done right. So, and where we met doing the Porsche, the Westmont Porsche, I was there every day, right?
Oh yeah.
I showed up in, you guys started
Which is unheard of.
7 o'clock in the morning. I was there at 7 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
spent 2 hours with you, and went back to the office, right?
Yep. Which is
So we
unheard
had-
of for architects.
Right. So every day we had a touch point, right? So we could touch point. What are we doing today? What are the problems, right?
Yep.
Okay, then I'm going, you know where I'm at. Just call me if you have a problem. Architects can't usually afford that, right?
Yep.
So that allows me to get it done right for my client, which I actually treated Napleton like a client. I didn't treat them like I was their employee.
Yeah.
I treated them like a client. So I was always looking out for them as if they were a client. But to get there and get it done right, and then to be able to I know I'm not going to be sued by them if something goes wrong. So I had the opportunity to make decisions in the field, as also putting on the owner's rep hat.
Yeah.
I'm the owner's rep, making decisions and doing sketches and not worrying about the liabilities, because I'm getting this done. We're getting it done right. The owner's not going to sue me because I work for them, right? So, and I'm working in the best interest of the company, and they know that.
Yeah.
So it gives you freedom. It gives you a freedom that you don't have as an architect working in an office where you're worrying about all that stuff. Where every time you turn around, you get what's my exposure to liability on this issue? It's a contract. You have sub trades that could be compromising your exposure to liability depending on what they do. You can't be on the field every day. So what decisions is the general contractor making when I'm not there? Mm-hmm. So being on site as often as I am working for them, it allows me, number one, it allows the general contractor to have a comfort level that they're going to have the answers that they're going to need.
Oh yeah.
Because one of the things I've learned is that you won't get questions from the GC until you come on site, and then you're inundated with questions, which makes you, if an architect is there once a week, right? What questions are not being answered the other 4 days a week, right? Yeah. So if I'm there every day and I get 10 or 12 questions a day, but if I'm only there once a day as a standard architect and I get 20, 30 questions, what decisions are being made because the trade is going, well, I got to get this done. I don't have time to ask this. I'm just going to do it this way.
Yeah, and builders are builders for a reason, right? Yeah. We're good at building. You draw it up, you tell us what to build, we build it. We love building, and when they construction, general contractors, the subs, they think, and they do, you get the ones that have a lot of knowledge, right? They've been around for a lot of years, but do they know the structural calcs? Do they know this? And it's when they start making those decisions that makes you wonder, and that's where the liability comes in, right?
Right. And I mean, as we all know, each sub trade has certain skill sets. Some framers are the best in the world. Other framers, maybe they just know what they know because they've only done this limited work. As you know, we worked on the Westmont Porsche with a framer that was one of the best in the business.
Oh yeah, it was awesome. I loved working with them.
And,
can I circle back to Napleton real quick? About just to let people know of the complexity of that project. You took two separate buildings at two separate elevations and turned them into one building while the tenant, or we'll call it a tenant, or just Porsche, was still operating.
Yes.
Right. And I look back at that project and I just think, I was like, wow, the moving parts that you on the front end had to deal with before there was even breaking ground and during the breaking ground, it was just a crazy project to witness and be on.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that was obviously the existing building we had that was not the Porsche building. Basically, we were essentially doing finish work in there, while on the other side we were doing raw work, right? So it's probably the only project where I had every phase of construction going on at the exact same time. Yeah, we were doing drywall work and finish work on one side, and then we were doing, concrete work, interior concrete work on the one on from on the other side. And in the middle, we were excavating for footings and foundations because we had a ground up addition in the middle. So it's like you were going from every single phase at the same time,
like walking through seasons.
Exactly right. And like you're like, okay, you put on one hat, it's like, okay, this drywall bead doesn't look right, and this like this. Then you go over here and going, oh, we got to set the in-ground lifts. So it's like you had your service guy, and it's like, okay, we got to set those and pour. So it was interesting going, and then in the middle of it, we installed an escalator.
Yes,
which was fun.
Oh my gosh, I remember bringing that escalator in.
Swinging that, I mean, and that was swung in when we already had a deck in place, right?
It was right.
So they actually swung it in, and then they put it down on, I forget what they did, put it on some forklifts, and they moved it in place, and then we hooked it up to the A-frame, and then and lifted it up through the hole. I mean, it was incredible process.
Oh yeah, and that project goes back to like you couldn't like. One, that project needed you. That was your project. That was your baby. But then also you had to make sure you partnered with the right general contractor.
Yeah.
To make that happen, right? Because if you had a Joe Schmo in there, it would have been horrible. It would have been bad news, probably.
Well, let's back up a little bit. With Napleton is Ed Napleton. One of the things that he did that other dealers don't is that he was also into real estate and construction, and they have their own construction company. They do minor stuff, but he was always doing construction and understood it. So he was working with an architect. Actually, as I understand it now, he was working with E. Anthony in a design build capacity where Tony Gierzik's brother owned an architecture firm.
Yeah.
And he once his brother collapsed at an architecture firm, Tony still continued the construction, but the architect that was working with Tony's brother split off and did his own thing. So Ed Napleton was working specifically with a single architect through all the stuff for years. And he was an old school hand drawing, hand rendering architect.
Yeah.
And he passed away. So without him, Ed moved to hiring architecture firms. And he did not like it because for the reasons that we talked about, where they have schedules and fees, and they can't do this without a change order. And he was very frustrated. It wasn't hands-on. He wants to make a change, and it couldn't happen right away, and you couldn't have meetings. And so that's when he decided he wanted to hire someone in-house, and that's where I stepped in when I came in to be the surrogate to the architect that he had. I think E. Anthony, who is a design build firm, and one of the Rich who they had working for them, came from a structural engineering background. So he pre-drew all the shop drawings.
Yeah, I remember.
Detailing, and then handed that to the steel manufacturer.
What we want.
Who then generated shop drawings off of that.
Yeah.
So the thing was, since the structural engineer, I mean, there was a point at which we had steel coming in at a bunch of different levels, different angles. Rich figured it out. Him and I kind of worked it out, and then gave it to the steel guy, the manufacturer who did the shop drawing. It's a level of detailing that the structural engineer wouldn't normally have picked up on, because they're not installing it, right?
Yep.
Because they think, well, I got all these, I sized all these members, and he has connections. A lot of it's boilerplate. We have connections, but then he doesn't look at that column and all these, where all these things are coming in at different angles, right? So that's something that's got the installer, the one who's the shop drawing guy, has got to figure all that out. So there was about an 18-inch level change between the old the original Porsche building and the new building. So we had to figure out where that changed. So we figured that the service drive, which we were building down the middle, that should be level with the showroom. And then the service department would be lowered down the 18 inches. And we kept those two functions separate. And then we had so the service department was set down that 18 inches, and we had a ramp and stair system that kind of combined those two, which worked out really well.
And structural aside, and let me know if I'm just getting too long. Maybe I'm just missing Porsche or missing being out there working with you guys. But structural aside, with that 18-inch difference, did you have to think about now ADA or like compliance and all that stuff to make?
Yes, that's why we did that ramp. There was we also, on the other side, we also had that retail boutique, which is, you know, so yeah, at the front, on the other side of the service drive, we had the retail boutique that was actually set at the lower side of it. So unfortunately, I mean, since we had customers going back and forth, so we had to deal with the accessibility issue with that. So initially I was going to do a lift, like just a lift to get people down.
Oh, okay.
But we decided, I think it was talking with Mark or Tony or whatever. Oh, no, it was the concrete guy. I think we started looking at going, it would be cheaper because we were looking at $25,000 or $30,000 for a lift that's going to take you 18 inches.
Yeah.
And I think what we decided was that it was cheaper to do a ramp.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a ramp with a side stair, and that worked out cheaper and with, it was easier to do in the time frame we had with the lead time. Then it was easy to pour the concrete and figure that out. So.
Yeah, you didn't have to deal with anything mechanically. You got your ramp easy.
Yeah.
Well,
so I mean, the other thing with that project, though, also, and this is pointing to doing the design build stuff and having the flexibility was. If you remember at the very beginning, before we started the new remodel, they needed to get a flush mounted alignment rack into the existing service or the existing area. And that was happening so far in advance of all the other build outs that unfortunately set our finished floor height because we had to determine a way to get that in front of them. So that was installed, and then that set our finished floor height.
You were set.
Everything had to, and then everything, and that what happened was once we got things going, we figured out we didn't have the heights.
Yeah.
For our lifts, right? The minimum height. They were a little uncomfortable with what was left over.
Uh-huh.
So we decided to raise the structure in that area.
To accommodate for it.
To accommodate that, the additional foot or so, or a foot and a half.
Yeah.
So that is where, and at that point, when you start going to your consultants, and you say, we're going to make a change, and then they start charging you out the wazoo to make this change. So what I decided to do is I decided to design the concept for the structure, for raising the structure.
Yeah.
With a column, with a column extension, and I came up with the ideas and the sketches, gave it to my structural engineer, and all he then did was double check the calculations on the loading and did all the welds and then calculate. So he didn't have to do any of the drawing. All he had to do was markups.
Yeah. Which
saved everyone a lot of money in the back end because he's now not setting up a draftsman to sit there and spend 30, 40 hours doing all these details. It just, he took sketches, annotated them.
And he doesn't have the urgency like you, right?
Yes, exactly right.
The time.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So he didn't have, all you have to do is take a look at it, double check some calculations, and then, okay, I got to weld a plate on the top of the one column, and then I got a plate on the sub column, and then we got the weld. Yeah, so he was able to do all that very quickly and very cheaply. So that points to the efficiency of the design build process.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. A question for you, since again into the design build, and let me know if you talking here off, we need to end, but the design build, is there, because so far all you talked about is the design build for architecture, the architecture, engineering, designing, right? You haven't even dipped your toes into like design build, construction, and architecture. Is there pros and cons to having a design build firm that's architecture and construction?
Well, I mean, I think the issue is there are project management firms out there that kind of do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the issue comes down to comfort level with the owners and the end users. A lot of times they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket.
Really?
So I think separating what I like to call it is modified design build,
Mm-hmm.
where if I can hire a general contractor
Mm-hmm.
and we can do a bid now, whether it's open book, cost plus type thing with the contractor, or you bid it out, select the contractor, the GC, and then work with them in a design build capacity. You can bid out based on design drawings and concept, and get a point, say you're at a 90%, 60-70% set of drawings, bid out to a contractor while you're still, and then select someone, and then your relationship going forward could be design build, right?
Gotcha.
Where it's the looseness of how you interface with the GC, right?
And if that GC is compatible too, right? It's gotta
Yes,
be right.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the business has changed. I mean, I remember back in the day when I would do a pre-bid meeting with 6 or 7 contractors in a room with trades, and you would have this big meeting where you openly discuss the project and the apples to apples, and everyone would throw and be a big conversation. I remember when all of a sudden there was a change in the process, and the contractors didn't want to put out their ideas into the open field. That it was like, I remember there was one project in particular where it's like all of a sudden I said, "Okay, guys, let's talk structure. Let's talk schedule. What about this and this?" And it's like, and no one said a word.
Really? What
And
do you think changed that?
I think the competition. I think the general. It may have been I don't remember at that point. We're talking probably about mid '90s.
Is that
Oh no, early 2000s. I think we're talking like 2004 or 5, 2003, where I think the competition, for some reason I don't remember, but the competition was so bad, was so hard, that no one wanted to tip off anyone else. So if a general contractor was in the field and they said, "Oh, here's an issue.
Yeah.
We know how to deal with this, but we don't want anyone else to know because we don't know how they're thinking about it.
They would
We're
want to
gonna
get
help
paid
on
for
that."
it or a change order.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I remember specifically there was a friend of mine who was bidding it. She was a very close friend of mine, and we had a relationship. And I said, "Okay, guys, schedule. What do you think about this?"
Yeah.
And no one said anything. And then she stepped up to the plate and said, "I think this is doable. I think we do this. We could meet that schedule." All of a sudden, everyone was like, "Yeah, we can meet that schedule. We can meet."
Really?
So
Yeah.
again, so it's like it was about the competition at the time.
Yeah.
As earlier on, it's like everyone wanted to make sure that everyone understood apples to apples. There was a point at which everyone wanted to make sure that they thought they had a bead on the project that no one else would have. So they were keeping things very close to the vest.
You wouldn't have the contractors in one room talking, would you?
Oh, we would, yeah. It was
So you'd
yeah.
have bidding general contractors in the same room, and they.
Oh yeah, it would be an open meeting with all the general contractors. They would walk around, they would see it. We would have the pre-bid meeting would be, you sit around, you talk about the generalities, you talk about the general conditions of what you want to do. Everyone would have a chance to go and look around, and then they come back to you with specific questions, but you would give them, and at that point my bid letter was like a 10-page thing where it was contractual things, schedule things, you had unit cost things, you had a way to put the thing together. You talk about now, I don't know if now my bid invitation letter is just an email,
Yeah.
or I just outline it out in an email, send it to them, and just say, here's the basic outline. We'll talk about it in more detail at the pre-bid meeting. I mean, Porsche kind of became my thing after Westmont.
Yeah.
So we did presidential towers downtown Chicago.
Yeah.
There's you have the towers, and then there was a retail area down on the ground level, and there used to be a Walmart in there. So Walmart, it was like 28,000 square foot,
Yeah.
right? And they left, and they still had a lease, and they were basically sitting there. It was empty, and Mr. Napleton made a great deal and sublet it from him. We converted that space into a dealership, into a Porsche dealership, with a full service service department.
Yeah.
And that we had to, that one we had to go through a PD amendment because the PD didn't allow the use for automotive. So, and then in Chicago, your automotive service and is a 4-hour separation between it and anything else. So now,
When you say separation, a fire
separate, yeah.
4 hour, wow.
In the IBC, the general International Building Code, there's no separation between sales and service.
Yeah.
Right? There's no separation, right?
Yeah.
Unless you have a tenant next door, which you may have some tenant separation. But in Chicago, there's a 4-hour separation between automotive service, repair, and any other occupancy. So thank God that we had a roof deck above us, so it was a concrete structure, and that the post-tension concrete roof deck had a 7-hour rating, right? So we were good with that. But I had a 1-hour tenant wall separation, so I had to beef that up to 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then Porsche, all these dealerships now have these open windows where you can look into service.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm dealing with shutters, and I got to have a 3-hour shutter or a 4-hour shutter that closes.
Wow.
So yeah, so that one was fun just from the logistics of how do I get a 4-hour separation,
Yeah.
On one side I had a 2-hour CMU demising wall, and another side I had a 1-hour tenant demising wall. So working with my framer, which it was the same one who did the Westmont Porsche, I asked them, and this is another benefit of doing it kind of design buildy. I said, Gus, what would you do here? What's the easiest for you?
Yeah.
How would I accommodate? And he's the one that came and says, well, do shaft wall.
Okay.
So I said, okay. So we sat down, and I said, okay, so there's a dozen different shaft wall construction, and we're actually going up very high. So we came up and decided the specific UL shaft wall assemblies to use. So when I had a 2-hour CMU wall, I did a 2-hour shaft wall on top of that. If I had a 1-hour demising wall, I then did a 3-hour shaft wall on top of that. So it was the perfect way to accommodate the hourly rating from all these different situations by using a single concept for how to do it.
Yeah.
Because then your shaft wall, you have a 1-hour, 2-hour, 3-hour, all the shaft wall stuff. You just put that in your drawings. And you say, hey, this is the UL number this is the UL number that, and he knows exactly what he needs to do. And you can actually turn that, and we use that sometimes as a ceiling.
Okay.
We did the second phase of that recently, where we had some black iron from the restaurants going through our space. And we first off said, well, let's relocate it. But the problem is that the welding of the black iron would require us to clean out the ducts, because the welds would cause fire. That would shut down all the restaurants, because that black iron was the landlord's black iron, would shut down all the restaurants, right? While you're cleaning that out. So we said, we can't do that. So we decided we'll just do a shaft wall drywall ceiling underneath that. So basically we demised the plenum
Yep.
between the deck and that, so that we isolated the black iron. So,
Wow.
you know, creative solutions, all this, that's where the design build really comes in help, where you sit down with your trade
Yep.
and you engage them in how do you want to do this?
Yeah.
What's the easiest way to accommodate this?
Bring their skills, their knowledge in.
Bring their skills in. And
Yep.
and we haven't talked about means and methods, where the thing, one of the things that a lot of architects sometimes don't know is, when you understand how trades do their work, is what an architect needs to do. Sometimes an architect over details their drawings, so that GC has to meet the specs of the drawings.
Yeah.
They can't they can't say, well, I can do this cheaper, right? So the task or the skill is, how do you communicate scope so that the GC understands exactly what he needs to do, and have the freedom to utilize his means and methods to do it in the cheapest, most efficient way possible, without the architect stepping in and over detailing it and pushing the construction to a more expensive, because we tend to overkill, right?
And that comes with knowledge.
That comes with now, and so much, not so much knowledge. Well, knowledge, yes,
experience.
But also understanding and working with contractors and trades to understand what they do, right?
Yep.
So to have, I think one of the biggest things that contractors hate about architects is that we think we know everything.
I'll lock horns with you, man.
So one of the biggest compliments is that when walk onto a site and they say, it's like, you're open to ideas. You are open to listening to us, and you ask our opinion.
Yep.
And I think most architects have an ego thing.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. And that's one of the first things I learned when I was on site, was like, I don't know. What do you suggest? Teach me and educate me on this. What do you need? And I'll come up with a detail.
Yeah.
Right?
Part of the thing that we're trying to include in the scope of this podcast series is exposing some of the pillars of industry to a newer audience, the next generation that's kind of coming up. Of the things that you've sort of said this in different pieces, Bob. So, you stress the importance of traveling outside of your area, exposing yourself to new and creative things outside of your bubble. You've expressed that you can get licensed and have the title of something, but really all these things come down to experience and exposure. What would maybe be a handful of things, or a thing that you would lend of something that you've learned already to someone coming up into the industry to help them out?
I think the thing I think is one of the biggest things that was helpful for us as architects, but also was one of the banes of architects today, is the computer. I think the best architects that I have met are ones that started with hand drawn and then learned the computer. The people who have learned only on the computer, I think, missed out on certain skill sets. And I can, as a director and as a manager and as someone reviewing drawings, I mean, the computer allows you to do things, and because the computer allows you to zoom in and come out and do this all the time, you don't take a piece of molding and look at it, right? And hold it up to the wall and say, oh, okay, well, that's too big. I need maybe a little bit smaller. Or when you draw something by hand and you take a scale and you put it on there and you draw it, it's to a scale, you don't learn how big things really are in proportion. You lose proportion. You lose that whole thing that we learned when we were looking at ancient architecture and Palladio and all this stuff. When I went to Europe, one of the things they did is we went to a church and our task were to measure it, to field measure it. And we found out that nothing measured up. It looked perfectly symmetrical, but when you measured it, nothing was the same dimension. And then you learned implied symmetry, which was like Palladio took this and said, "There's nothing on this structure was symmetrical, so I'm going to force symmetry." Well, you can't learn. That's, when you sit there and you stand back from something, you look at it, then you go up and you measure it and go, where did they? How did they do it? That's the hands-on nature of architecture. I think you lose. I remember I was working with an architect and I was looking at his details and noticed that these details in the building were right above each other. But when I started looking at it, off the wall, things didn't line up. And I found out that he built each one of these details independently of each other. I said, but they're right above each other. You should have built all these things together and then cut them apart, because the sheathing didn't line up. He didn't have all those things. So I think what the computer gives you, quick ways to do things without understanding sometimes what you're doing. The automatic things that allows you to do when you're using, like, it'll cut sections for you, it'll do this, it'll compile drawings for you and print them out, but then you don't get to double check it. It's that hands-on eye to double checking things. I think you need to be more hands-on. You need to look at the details and look at it from a practical standpoint. I think everything also turns to be fast. You fire experienced architects because their salaries are too high, and you give it to a young kid out of school because he's cheaper. But the whole point of being an architect is the experience of 20 years of experience. You lose that when you keep hiring young kids, right? You lose the mentorship of having a kid out of school working with a 20-year experienced architect and getting that level of experience of someone marking up. And then I've also noticed that a lot of people don't listen and they don't want to learn. If how many times I've marked up a set of drawings and give it to someone, and then the next job I'm marking the same thing up again.
Yeah.
I don't know how to, unless you have the time to sit down and pull some of the things. Okay, so this is what I marked up last time. This is what I marked up this time. It's the same markup. Why did you not carry that markup to this drawing? Where was that knowledge where you absorbed that knowledge and then applied it? So it's the application of knowledge learned. It seems to me a lot of these inexperienced, I'll say inexperienced architects don't. It's like, I'm just moving to the next thing and I'm just doing the same thing. Someone will mark it up, right?
Yeah.
It's, what is it that you are in the field of architecture for? What passion do you have for it? And what do you want to learn? I mean, where do you want to go? You just want to be a draftsman for the rest of your life? Or do you want to be a project manager, a project architect? Do you want to stamp things? Do you want to, take on that liability? It always the thing to me is, why did you get your license if all you're going to do is be a draftsman?
Yeah.
I've met architects they have a license, and I go, well, you're going to stamp this, right? He goes, no, I don't stamp anything. I go, how can you call yourself a real architect if you don't take liability for the stuff you draw to stamp it, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it all the time, but it's taking that. There's a leap from being someone who just produces something and lets someone else stamp it, to actually taking responsibility for what's there. And for someone like me, who have actually stamped things and have taken responsibility for other people's work, right? For draftsmen underneath you, you've got to take a leap of faith that it's like, I stamped this drawing and that guy screwed up because I couldn't, or they'd made a mistake, and you go in the field and go, well, as a project manager, as the project architect, the architect of record, I have to absorb that mistake, and I got to get it right.
Yep.
So the thing is knowledge. The thing is, learning, and what are you being an architect for? What are you in this business for? Is it just a job to you?
Yeah.
Or you know, we are one of the 3 or 4 historical professions: politics, law and politics, medicine, architects, master builder, and prostitutes. Those are the historic, those are the historic, you know, professions, right? From way back to the beginning. So today, the legacy of the architect, if you're passionate about that, do you understand that legacy of Imhotep and all the, you know, the master builder who built a cathedral, and before they took the scaffolding down, you were put in the middle of it. If it fell, you died, right?
Yeah.
That, I mean, to take that level of passion and like this to, I can't imagine being, you know, an architect back then and doing a dome and not knowing, you're basically, will this stand up? You know, I have an idea. I don't know if this is going to stand up. That learning process of taking, you know, that cathedral window where you're cutting out this masonry wall and putting more and more windows. It fell and it fell and it fell, and you rebuild and you rebuild and you get it down, and that's how you started learning. The masons started learning how this thing support and what you can do, the limits of the material. Understanding the history of all those people that came before you, you know, you know, the 20th century with steel buildings and, you know, all the legacy of making, you know, buildings taller and stuff. Are you passionate about that knowledge? Are you passionate about where that came from and what you're doing? I see architects doing phenomenal things that I could never think of doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, to wrap it up, Dave, I think if I hear you correct, it comes down to the passion and what you want to do. Because I mean, on the construction side, I'll just touch base real quick. I love construction. I love watching building. I almost crash every time I look by and see construction, you know? So
Yeah.
if I hear you correct, it's just what you want to do and what are you passionate about in the architectural field.
Right.
Well,
You know, I knew I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid. I grew up in a new subdivision, and we would play in the houses being built. And I thought it was kind of cool playing in the skeletons of houses being built in the new development. And I said, I want to do this. This is something I want to do. And I remember when I was living in Arizona, I was talking to my friend, you know, when I was there, I said, I want to be an architect. And they're like, well, yeah, right. You know, it's like, and then finally when I did it and I went out there and I said, what are you doing? I'm an architect. I'm like, wow, good for you. Right.
Yeah.
You know, but again, my dad was a graphic designer, and, you know, and I just felt I couldn't do that level of art on an everyday, that level of creativity. It's kind of odd because you're an architect, which is a creative business, but I watched my dad every night doing stuff going, I don't think I could be that creative every day on every piece of art you do.
Yeah.
So architecture was kind of like the fallback for me. It was like, this is something I could handle.
Yeah.
But now 30, 40 years later, it's like, you know, do I see that level of passion in people, you know, the kids coming up, you know? There are a lot of good people out there, a lot of good draftsmen, a lot of, you know, but when I see an architect who doesn't want to learn, that's the thing that really makes me sad, is you get someone who feels that I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't need to learn anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they get stagnant.
Yeah.